episode 3 of Context. I am Mr. B from Social Studies channel on YouTube. And Robert, introduce yourself.
Robert Marshall from Reading Through History.
All right, and we still, that's okay, because we're getting to know each other pretty well doing this. We don't have to meet each other in person. But yeah, this is the third episode. I put the email address out last time, which is contextpodcast@gmail.com. That's contextpodcast@gmail.com. And I had a few people, okay, 3 people, email. And I want to give shout outs. So first of all, shout out to a former student of mine, Neil. He has been great giving feedback. He wanted you to know that, Robert.
All right.
Yeah, and then
Howdy,
there's
Neil.
What's that?
Howdy, Neil.
Howdy what?
I just gave a shout out to Neil. Howdy, Neil.
I thought, okay. Thought you said something different. Yeah, our internet connection's not the best right now, but. And then Mason from historypodcast.com. He's the one who runs the History Podcast subreddit on Reddit. And he added us to the directory on there. He's been very supportive. Has some via email as well. And then give a shout out to my aunt, who she didn't like the President Obama soundbite that we do at the beginning. You know, the introduction where I have JFK.
Oh, yeah.
And she didn't like that. She's like, you're going to turn off a lot of conservatives from listening to your show by having that in there. And I'm just like, well, what the president said was very universal. I don't think it's not offensive. So anyway, but she listened.
Yeah, I'm here, so I mean, I'm both economic and stuff. I'm very conservative.
Yeah, I don't agree with the president on a lot of issues either, but we usually don't go into that. As a matter of fact,
that's dangerous. That and religion is very dangerous.
Yeah, especially as educators, we want to try to at least stay open-minded and open to different viewpoints. But
oh yeah,
and that reminds me, while we're at it, we're not. I think this is an unspoken agreement. We've already pretty much decided this, even though we've never talked about it. But we're not going to talk about the presidential primary debates, are we not?
No, because I will admit I only watched the highlights because I was preparing for this show last night.
Well, there you go. But the thing is, I think a lot of it is. You know, a lot of the stuff that's going on now is not going to be remembered, you know, and so I'm just waiting a little bit longer until, because, you know, it's not even, we've got well over a year until the next presidential election anyway.
That's what's ridiculous about it. I'd be so sick of it.
Well, so anyway, we'll go back into more things that we're going to be talking about probably for years to come. So, and that brings us back. This is a follow-up from last show. This is the last thing we talked about that I wanted to begin the show with, and it's also ongoing in the news. The news cycle. It's, you know, you're hearing the pundits talk about this quite a bit still because it's still controversial, and that's the Iranian nuclear deal, and Congress has yet to vote on it. But a lot of people have strong opinions about this, and slightly more people are against it than for it, so much that the president, let's see, when was that? 3 or 4 days ago, he came on TV, national TV, and he had a big speech trying to convince not only Congress, but the American public that we should do this deal, that this deal is good for the United States. It will prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. I thought the speech was really good. Did you catch his speech per chance?
I did not, and I'm trying to see. I read so many articles that I'm trying to remember if I even read through that. I remember seeing it.
Well, the bottom line, he was trying to debunk myths about it, mostly how a lot of people are saying that we didn't get a very good deal out of it, which I I just think that every deal that the United States gets is pretty good. I mean, we always have the leverage and upper hand. But the other thing that I really appreciated about what he said was, we should do whatever we should to prevent war. And it seems like a lot of people in Congress almost want war. It's really weird. Like, you have somebody like Lindsey Graham, for example, who is running for president. He basically is just beating the war drums. And there's an article that I sent you too that it's a little, it gets you thinking about the motives of, okay, why do we really want to get mad at Iran? Why is a conflict with Iran a good thing? Because it does seem like some people are pushing for it. And the article really, in a nutshell, did you catch that one? It's basically about the war hawks in Iran.
It's amazing me. I think I had to have not read it, even though I remember seeing the link and everything. But I don't know. We need to delete the old stuff out of that file once we've talked about it. But the bottom line is we just cannot afford a war with Iran. I mean, we've $18 trillion debt. I mean, how much did we spend in Iraq and Afghanistan? Do you remember the number?
I don't. No.
I mean, was it $6 or $7 trillion that cost? It was something insane. And then
something ridiculous.
Then the long-term cost of it, just the benefits we have to pay out. I mean, I read an article one time that just talked about the benefits that have to be paid to the soldiers and stuff who fight in those wars. I mean, believe it or not, we are still paying like spousal and children's benefits to like people from the Spanish American War and stuff like that. I mean, that's crazy. Yeah, and it's just every time we go in, look at what we get on the backside of it. I mean, Iraq was an unmitigated disaster. Just we got ISIS out of that. In Afghanistan, we still got troops there. We still have to pay money to keep the people in power there that we want in power. I mean, it's just insane. But it's with Iran, it's the history we have with them. It's the radical ayatollahs and stuff. And what else? What was the other option? It's kind of what I want to know. I mean, we don't make that deal. What's the alternative? Yeah,
that's another argument the president made is, this is actually in the interests of the United States and Israel because, if we just keep delaying, they're going to probably develop nuclear weapons anyway. Like, they're going to find ways around it. He didn't quite come out and say that exactly, but there are. We still have the upper hand because they're not going to develop nuclear weapons. And a lot of people say we can't trust them, but you actually said this at the very end of the show last week is, well, they can't trust us either. Why should they trust last week? Or I guess that was 2 weeks ago, last time we talked. Yeah. But I went into, the whole history before 1979, before when there was a brutal dictator that the U.S. and the U.K. supported. And of course, there's going to be animosity from people living in Iran towards the United States. We can't, and really why I keep bringing this up and why it upsets me is because there is a complete lack of humility from Americans on this issue. They refuse to even consider another perspective, the Iranian perspective. And the other thing is it's a purely emotional thing. Like, if you were to ask somebody on the street, what do you think about Iran? Chances are it would be a negative thing, although there's complete ignorance. They know nothing about the country. They couldn't even articulate why. They might mention something about Israel because they heard a soundbite on the news or something. But generally speaking, the reason why, and I'm going to really make us look good, history teachers and historians, they don't get emotional with things like this. Because they know the whole picture, they see the whole picture. It's the conversation's more reasonable, And we don't have to just automatically jump to fear, because a lot of it is based on fear. Every concern that people have here, they're really afraid of Iran getting a nuclear weapon, even though they can't articulate why exactly that is.
Yeah, and as I've thought about it more and more, the thing that kind of makes me feel a little more at ease about it is, I said, what's the alternative? And it's if we continue pretending that they're not there, we continue putting the sanctions on them. You know, we're pushing them more into that enemy sphere, and that's going to drive them towards trying to develop it. The only way you get them to stop trying to develop the weapon is you extend an olive branch. You start negotiations with them. You drop the sanctions. Iran starts letting more people, you know, immigrate to the United States. You open up a dialogue. And
right.
I hope it works. Because, I mean, there are fanatical people there. It's just with the, and we talked about it in the last video, the younger generation isn't flaming anti-American.
Yeah, you have people that are now, they grew up. Oh, okay, thanks for telling me. Go ahead and go finally. That's my daughter there. She had to go. She had to come downstairs and tell me that she had to go to the bathroom. Anyway, that's why we do this late at night, because anyway, Iran, yeah, young people in Iran, they have access to the internet. A lot of them.
That's the other thing I was going to mention, is it's going to bring people closer.
Right. A lot of people in the United States they're still living in what I call the post-World War II era, which means everybody's so afraid that there's going to be another Hitler. Everybody's afraid that they're going to be the politician that is guilty of appeasement. They don't want to be the next Neville Chamberlain. They all are afraid, because nobody wants a madman or perceived madman or a terrorist or anybody crazy to attack their country or to attack another helpless country under their watch. And I think we're still recovering from World War II. We don't want another Hitler, and so we keep trying to find another Hitler out there in the world. I don't think there is another Hitler in the world right now. Do you disagree?
And if you look at Persia, I mean, who's the last one you can name? I mean, you have to go back to Darius and Xerxes and guys like that. You know, Darius III, last time they tried to, attack what you would call the West. That's the last I can think of. I'm not an expert on Persian history or anything, but
I'm not either.
I mean, people could say, oh yeah, well, they went to war with Iraq and all this stuff, but there we were meddling in the Middle East again, supporting Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, never forget that picture of Donald Rumsfeld shaking hands with Saddam Hussein. Yeah, and that's the thing.
We arm him, and 3 years later, right after the end of the war that ended in '88, we're at war with the guy.
Yeah. And just like we were
aiding at... Same thing with Al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda,
or Taliban.
The rebels. Well, yeah, the Taliban.
That's what I meant.
The ones who were resisting the Soviet Union. Of course, we wanted the Soviet Union to lose, and so we were on their team then. It's all strategic. It's all geopolitical. That's why I feel like a lot of people, they're not thinking about the big picture when they're looking. And another thing I really just want to stress is diplomacy works. It does. Diplomacy historically has prevented so many conflicts from happening, and I think diplomacy doesn't get the attention it deserves. I mean, think about your interest in history. You said that you got interested in history because of the Civil War. Wars are cool. I got interested in history because of the Vietnam War and World War II. I mean, especially young men, it's all about, the wars. But what's less exciting is diplomacy.
If you're living through it, it's quite interesting, but it's not at all intriguing to learn about. That's for sure.
So that's why I always say that diplomacy is forgotten in history, that how it's worked so much.
Yeah, you don't learn about the wars that never happened.
Exactly. I think this is a war that's not happening by us making this deal. And it's not just the United States.
Yeah.
Pretty much the entire world does be precedent on this.
Yeah, I mean, we can't afford the war financially, and Iran can't afford the war because they would lose badly. Yeah. Their people in power would not be in power afterwards.
Definitely. And that's really, I think, a lot of those Ayatollahs, I always say that word wrong, Ayatollahs, I think they, just like any other leader in the world, self-interest is of utmost importance, and they're going to look after themselves first, their power first, and before they look.
As I said in the last video, the dangerous ones would be the ones who believe the whole thing, hook, line, and sinker. You know, that they're supposed to bring about the end of the world.
Yeah, I did research that more. The Couds Day thing is definitely more mainstream than I originally thought. However, when people on the streets chant "Death to America," first of all, it's not the majority of people chanting that. But second, the people who are chanting that, it doesn't mean they necessarily want to kill every American. I think a lot of it is anti-Zionism. I don't think they're just sick of Western influence. They don't want the United States to rule the Middle East. Is when they say "Death to America," somebody like Rick Santorum is going to say, so they want to kill all of us. They want our destruction. They don't want the death to America, literally. I don't think it's a literal thing. I think they're frustrated on the being, controlled by Western powers, basically. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. It's the clash of civilization. I mean, it is the big issue on the world stage now, is the radical strand of Islam against Western civilization. I mean, that's the nexus of all the clashes going on across the Middle East, and the fear of the massive immigration into Europe, and the birth rates and all this stuff. I mean, it's going to be uncomfortable to watch all of this stuff play out. That's for sure. I mean, it's not going away anytime soon.
Well, I think we're in the right direction, at least. I do agree. It's a scary thing, especially if you're in Israel. I understand that. You're looking at all of this and you're scared to death.
I mean, but dialogue is progress.
Definitely.
For sure.
All right. Well, I was going to mention the military-industrial complex, of course. The reason why is because I do think, and I know this sounds a little bit like a conspiracy theory, and conspiracy theory is pejorative anymore. That's like automatically, oh, you're crazy. But I think there are people that they don't mind the United States being at war all the time. Like, oh, you want to beat the war drums to go to war with Iran? Let's do it. Come on, because we're going to make some money. There's a lot of people going to be making some money from this.
Lots. I mean, I'm sure you've read the Dwight Eisenhower speech when he was leaving office, his farewell address, where he warned about it and talked about it, and you're just like, oh my gosh, this guy called it. I mean, it's just, we spend so much money. I mean, what is the number? We spend more money on our military than 28 of the next 29 largest military budgets on the face of the earth combined. Something like that. And 27 of the 28 are our allies.
Something like that.
I mean, it's up in the high 20s.
We're so afraid. It's back to fear. But I think a lot of people that are actually in the either they're in the military, but I'm not talking about your average soldier, because they're the ones who has to do the dirty work. But I'm talking about people that profit from, like, I'm thinking of like Lockheed Martin and stuff, companies like that. When you make money, I mean, it's not you that's going off to fight. Your company just has a boom in business. But yeah, Dwight D. Eisenhower, that guy, his presidency doesn't get a whole lot of attention these days, other than Cold War.
Because of what we talked about earlier. I mean, it's because we were keeping the peace. I mean, he got us out of Korea, and then we just had this big era of prosperity. And yeah, the country was producing and exporting all this stuff, and he kept us out of conflict.
Well, he was like Reagan, where he built up the military still, though. Like there was still increased military spending, and that's why it was so crazy, because like literally at the end of his term, he's like, oh, by the way, the military industrial complex sucks and we need to be careful, even though he was a large part of the reason why it exists today.
Oh yeah. But I mean, it was just what we had to go through to win the war. I mean, it was the first and probably only the second, first and only time in our history, but I think it's only the second time in the history of the world where you can look at an entire society just threw everything it had into a war and winning the war. The French did it in the French Revolution because they were fighting off all of Europe. Napoleon kind of carried on that legacy. But I mean, we had kids going and, taking their bicycles so they could melt them down, as scrap metal and build tanks. Women stopped wearing pantyhose so we could have silk for our parachutes. And it's just, we threw everything we had in it. And a machine, a beast like that just doesn't go away. Once the government creates or starts doing something, it almost never vanishes.
That's
ever.
True. Yeah.
And you just cannot, it's such a huge part of the economy. If we did try and slay the beast, think of the ramifications on the economy. It would just be catastrophic.
It would. And, it's just like the too big to fail thing. It would be catastrophic to let certain companies fail, but
what's the alternative? We just keep going more and more in debt because we're spending so much money on it. We just kick the can down the road. It's what we've been doing
so much.
Since the 60s.
The military, if any congressman or senator dares to cut military spending, they are automatically marginalized. And it's amazing to think, like you mentioned earlier, like what are we so afraid of when we spend so much money on our military? We should only fear ourselves, really.
I mean, and we are in the long term killing ourselves.
Well, the Roman Empire is always the greatest example of, they spread their military too far. That was only one part of it, obviously. I think complacency is
all the
another big part of it.
Going into that, you see it playing out across the Western world today. I mean, just massive debt, massive amounts of, they were doing it through their colony, their colony or whatever they called it. And they had all these different people they were trying to control, whereas now the Western world's getting a massive influx of immigrants and the clash of cultures and things like that's going on. And of course, the massive debt, the huge military spending. But I want to go back to what we were talking about a second ago. The weird thing about the military is that's our form of patriotism now. I mean, people look at that and they equate it to being patriotic. It's like it doesn't matter what look at Iraq and Afghanistan. Huge percentages of the American population do not support the war. But the one thing you can never do is not support the troops. It doesn't matter how much you oppose the the second Iraq war, the occupation afterwards. You could criticize President Bush and Dick Cheney from now till the end of time. You could criticize the war, the money, everything. But the one thing you didn't do, criticize the soldiers. You got to support the troops.
Yeah, that's
like you can't get rid of it. I mean, we got 80,000 troops in Germany. Why?
Yeah. Oh, the military bases all around the world. It's hard to justify. I mean, we keep talking about NATO. Like, wasn't NATO a Cold War thing? And so after the Cold War ended, they're like, well, we still need to keep our eye on them. We can't.
And ironically, Germany doesn't want us out because it brings in so much money to their economy. You never hear a peep from them get the troops out like you do in the Middle East, because we're not bombing and droning, and I don't like to word it this way, but we killed over 100,000 Iraqi civilians just as a result of the fighting.
At least,
and that's a low estimate.
Osama bin Laden, his official reason why he orchestrated the 9/11 attacks was because of the United States building military bases in Saudi Arabia.
Now, have you ever seen the? I mean, I have to take them at their word, but they're the translated, videos that he made. I mean, it is terrifying. But he just came right out and said he wanted to drag us into a prolonged war that will bankrupt America. He was fighting it as an economic war, not a military one.
I saw that too. Yeah, and I think the translation, I don't know if we can trust the translations, but I'm pretty sure it's pretty accurate. And now I
don't see why our government would lie to us about that when they're basically, why would they do something lie about it that he's so right about? That doesn't make any sense. But yeah, he said it's going to cost, so much money, it'll bankrupt the country and ruin the economy. And you hate to say we played into his hand. Yeah, you hate to say, he was right, but, it cost him his life in the end. But we got to trust that is true as well. But he's not parading around on videos. So, I know that in my mind. I don't doubt that they killed him. And I understand why they didn't publish the pictures and stuff.
Oh, we won't go on that hole right now.
Yeah. It's pretty obvious. That entire part of the world, a huge percentage of their population would have freaked out and would have turned them against us as well.
Yeah, well, and I could definitely understand the argument when someone says the terrorists, they have already won. Because if you look at how bogged down the United States military is,
and the
really across the world.
Yeah,
the fact that we've lost civil liberties over this, and imagine the next 9/11 attack, which will happen, inevitably, another attack will happen in American history.
We've had a lot of little ones since then. It's just.
But I'm talking a big one. A big one's going to happen, and then what's going to happen after that? It's going to be 1984. It's going to be complete totalitarianism, because when people, as we've seen throughout history, when they're afraid, they are willing to give up everything for security.
It makes me think of the Ben Franklin quote. I'll butcher it here, but I said something that people that aren't willing to fight for their, they'll give up some freedom in exchange for safety, deserve neither. I don't know. Like I said, I'm butchering the quote, but
yeah,
you've probably seen it. Basically saying you don't deserve freedom if you're willing to sacrifice. If you're willing to sacrifice. Like I said, I'm butchering it.
Yeah,
it was a brilliant quote.
You messed it up. Ben Franklin is rolling in his grave, but yeah, I think we should probably move on. This next topic, I think we could probably talk for an hour on, so we should go right into it. I think. It's the revised APUSH history standards, and they changed the standards because there were a lot of people upset, particularly in states like your beloved Oklahoma, but also other places too. And so they came out with new standards, and the standards they emphasize American exceptionalism, whereas some of the old standards were a bit negative about American history. These new standards make us look a lot better. Okay, so let's see if I can get the article. You have the article in front of you?
Yes. Okay. Important parts.
My page isn't opening up, but you want to highlight what you found from this, and then I'll go at it?
Yeah, and how do I even start framing this? There's just so much in this. The first thing I've got here is the original ones that they changed or altered or softened up, as they put it, had 50 thematic objectives in it. 50 themes, and they took it down to 19 because some of these were so offensive or whatever. But it said in the article, some of the names that were omitted from the 50 theme version were Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, and John Adams. Those guys weren't even mentioned. And I guess the part that the conservatives were upset about was, it highly emphasized slavery and the Native American, the plight of the Native American Indians. You see people calling it genocide, and you could argue that's a historical genocide, but always, so most of them died from smallpox and stuff like that, not from George Armstrong Custer running them through with the saber, although they did a lot of that too.
Oh yeah, 95% of them. They say 95% of them died from disease. But
yeah,
go ahead.
But the states were Oklahoma, Georgia, and Texas. They all introduced bills saying, "Oh, we'll just throw out the course altogether." And yeah, but that's the duality of America. I mean, I subscribe 100% to American exceptionalism. No other countries come close to accomplishing what we have. Spreading liberty and freedom and democracy, sometimes oddly through war and conquest and stuff like that, as we did here. But, the inventions, the progressions, the great thinkers, all of this stuff, air conditioning, automobiles, airplanes, landing on the moon. I mean, that stuff's amazing. And it's a part of American history, but, the negative is too. And the best way to do it is just tell the story, and be honest about it. But the problem is how much of this is political. I mean, you got people on the left who just, you can say they flat out seem to hate America. But then you got people on the right that is just, oh, we can do no wrong. We can do no wrong. So it's very complicated when politicians and, people from, what do they call them? The ivory towers? Is that what they call the people in the, the liberals in the college campuses? When they're dictating, the policy or the standards, this is an AP course. Here at the end, the last thing they said was remaining faithful to the requirements that colleges and universities set to achieve academic credit. Because the problem is AP, if you pass the test, you get a college credit. And it's really weird because in the college campuses, it's the liberal left that kind of sets the standards. But in these conservative states, like Oklahoma and Texas, it's conservative politicians that kind of set the standards. So you got this really weird thing going on where it's a high school classroom, yet it's for college credit, and it has to fit college credit standards. But here's the scary part to me. The people who were criticizing the curriculum said all materials should promote patriotism and respect for authority. That one's kind of scary. And
Nazis.
Should not encourage or condone civil disorder.
Nazis.
And they use the word disorder, not civil disobedience, civil disorder. That's very coded language right there.
Yes, it is. Very ambiguous language.
Yeah, you disagree with us, it's disorder. It's not civil disobedience. It's civil disorder. It's Rosa Parks sitting on a bus, refusing to get up. Oh, that's not civil disobedience. That's civil disorder. So it's kind of weird.
I first... I kind of got more passionate about this when I heard, and I'm going to mention a candidate that's running for president, Ben Carson. He said that there's the AP US history standards that they had originally. He said that something along the lines where he wouldn't be surprised if these kids going through this curriculum would want to join ISIS by the end of the year. And
I saw that.
I know he was, trying to be provocative and all that. But I was kind of offended by that because, first of all, the most important thing about learning history, in my opinion, you may disagree with this, but is learning about our mistakes. We don't want to repeat these same mistakes. I mean, that's something that's pretty important to a lot of history teachers, trying to get that message across. Okay, that's why we're focusing on the negative. And so I feel like when you gloss over things, and the first episode of this podcast, we talked about how slavery, even in some areas of the country, is just kind of like glossed over as not as bad as it actually was. What you're doing is you're shaping things up to happen again. And I know that seems kind of ludicrous, like, well, how could we go back to slavery like that? Or how could we go back so far?
Themes. I mean, Cypher had a great video out today where he kind of touched on that. You know, saying the history repeats itself is kind of a dumb thing to say if you're talking about like events, but it's the themes within it. You know, it's the through lines of history. It's the race mistakes. It's gender. It's government power. You know, it's immigration. It's these themes that are there all the time. Yeah, and you can't just ignore your past injustices. I mean, if you're not capable of admitting that this country made a mistake 150 years ago, you're dang sure not capable of admitting it's making a mistake today. You know, unless it's political, then it's perfectly okay. It's all Barack Obama's fault. You know, and then the people on that side say, oh, well, nothing's his fault. It was all Bush. He's trying to fix all those problems. It's like you can't even have an honest discussion in here when it's like that. And that's kind of what they're doing here. It's
politicized. It shouldn't be biased. As history teachers, we said a little while ago, we're supposed to be objective. We're not supposed to give them our opinion. I don't tell my students what my political party is. They might start to figure it out by listening to this podcast, but still, I don't want people to know, because I'm trying just to give them facts. And I might try to give them facts in a way that makes them laugh sometimes or is more entertaining. Yeah. But still, it's just facts. It's not like the Daily Show where you're spinning the information, or most news outlets where you're spinning the information to try to get them to go one way or the other, because that's pure. And so when we give these standards, it's critical that they are open-ended, that they are open to your own interpretation, that we're not just trying to brainwash these kids to say, yeah, America, we're better than everybody else, and that's all there is to it. I mean, we can't empathize with any other perspective. I mean, that's seemingly what some people want to do with these. And so I felt like when they give in and revise these standards, it felt to me like they were, I mean, they didn't go as far as maybe some conservatives actually would want them to go. Yeah. But they did give in, and in many ways they downplayed things. Like I don't have the article in front of me because my internet's jacked right now, but I think did they mention the Japanese internment camps? Not in that article, but okay, that was a different article I read. I can imagine. Well, stuff like that, like just the wording it's just so shady. Like, do you have another example you could share that where they changed the wording in a way to spin it? Well, I've got a few more highlighted parts here, and see, I'm trying to think. I don't know that there was another example in that article. I mean, you really got me sitting there thinking, but I'll just go with the things I've got here highlighted left. Said that it was never meant to be a description of the totality of what AP US history teachers must teach, but rather a simplified outline that guides the course. Right. So, yeah, I mean, you need an outline and stuff. That part seems reasonable. Yeah, I like that part. That's the part I like. But the quote here by Gary Hastings, or maybe Jerry, it's Gery. It's a very odd spelling. It could be Jerry or Gary. Said, you add examples. You teach it how you want to teach it. You just make sure you teach those important concepts. Here's the part that I laughed at. Yeah, you can teach all the rest of it, like, but these 50 things, you have to teach them that. And remember, you have to prepare them for this test. And those 50 standards, you pretty much have to teach them. It's like me and my history classes. There isn't any time to go off lollygagging on these things. And I had to cut my Civil War down from 17 days to 5, you know, just to get through the rest of it and then have time to review.
Yeah, and there's no time for you to teach it like you want to, because you have to drill these 50 themes and standards in, and those are the questions. You have to prepare the kids to take it. So I imagine the original objectives probably were pretty out there. And yeah, the conservatives would have wanted to hear. So I think they probably did move it closer to the center, but it's going to be watered down. And, oh, we can't offend this side or this side. I mean, what do you end up with? It's just a big, gigantic train wreck.
they're trying to make everybody happy. You're not supposed to make everybody happy with facts. You're just supposed to give the facts.
Yeah. But again, like I said, it's all interpretive. I mean, think of that article out of Japan where they're basically doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if we'll even get to it or not, but you know, they're trying to deny that these atrocities even happen when we've got witness, you know, people who lived through it. So they're telling you about. So that's what's going on. So there's going to be bias everywhere on all sides. So I don't know. I mean, I'd have to honestly read the objectives before and then read them now to come to a honest conclusion. And even then, I would be a little biased. But
we all are biased. That's the thing.
You're going to find it everywhere.
We strive not to be biased, but we are, and that's why I think it's critical to. I mean, it's good to be passionate about things, but as long as your students know where that passion's coming from and know that it's your own passion, it's not. I know it's difficult to do, but I think we have a tremendous responsibility as educators to leave out our own biases and let them figure it out on their own. And I do like the more loose framework, and Common Core is the same way. Common Core standards are much more just like a skeleton of, okay, here's what they need to learn. It's more skills-based. A lot of people don't like the Common Core standards for that reason. They felt like, well, that they're learning less. But actually, I think it allows more wiggle room for educators to be.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of environment I'd like to teach in. But, you know, we got our state U.S. history test, and it's way over here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure on camera it'll show up over here. But, you know, it's very conservative.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't believe some of the stuff you're telling me
make sure
last episode.
Yeah, make sure you mention Moses was the inspiration for the Bill of Rights.
Yeah, craziness. All right. Are we done on that topic, or because we could go on, but maybe we shouldn't?
I mean, that's.
Well, this next thing is a little bit more lighthearted anyway that I have on the list here. It's just an update on, and really this is all kind of follow-up so far because this is stuff that we talked about in prior episodes. But
yeah,
Eleanor Roosevelt made the news here a few days ago, and there was a poll that was given asking people who they would like to see, which woman would they like to see on the $10 bill. And Eleanor Roosevelt, she won the poll, and the second place winner was Harriet Tubman, who we talked about. Come on, internet. My internet's all jacked up. I think recording this here.
Yeah, those were the two that were mentioned for those. And yeah, I just read that one. I didn't think I printed anything off. But I mean, you talked about it. You mentioned how you don't want Eleanor Roosevelt on there because it seems like it's the obvious populist will put no thought into it person they'll stick on there. And at the end of the day, we know who she was because she's the first lady. I mean, yes, she did all this other stuff, but how did she get the voice to do that? She was a Roosevelt. She wasn't a person who really made history on her own. I mean, she had a huge heart, obviously, stood up for women, stood up for African Americans.
What she did with the United Nations is pretty.
Afterwards, yeah.
It was afterwards. That was pretty big, but again, you're right. She, it was because of her husband, and I know that's not.
There.
That sounds kind of misogynistic in a way, kind of bad of us to say, but no, it's.
I mean, but no, we're arguing the opposite because we argued for women who made history of their own accord.
Yeah.
I mean, Dorothy.
Sad fact is, though, so much. I mean, I like to think. I read this in a book recently. that, you know, so much of history is only half known because half of history mostly isn't written about, and that's about women. Because first of all, women didn't have much power until very recently at all, and especially government. You know, and you don't. I mean, think about something like the early history of our country. Like you read it. Like the last 4 years I taught America up to Reconstruction. So 1877, from American Revolution to 1877. That is all mostly white men that we're talking about here. And I mean, there's like Dorothea Dix, and there's others that start to creep in there. But and then of course First Ladies. And so like, you know, it is hard. The more I thought about it, I was like, well, maybe we should give First Ladies more of a chance here, because there's just less to choose from in history, and First Ladies have done a lot of things. They've used that position to their advantage, and I feel like I don't know. I also keep thinking about a show recently called House of Cards. Have you seen House of Cards? You've heard of House of Cards?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Well, that's if you watch that show, the First Lady in that show, she wants a lot of power for her own, and she can't escape being tied to her husband. She got it. I mean, a lot of what that show's about is kind of the tug of war of power between those two, the First Lady and the President, because the First Lady has ambitions of her own. And imagine if somebody like Hillary Clinton does get in office next year. Bill Clinton becomes the first man. Is that what they call it? And so, but that's not the same as, like, I don't know, who's that other woman that's in the race? Carly Fiorina, something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know if she's married, if she has a husband, but it's Bill Clinton. It would be like, well, he's been president before or whatever.
Like George Wallace in Alabama, when he couldn't be governor anymore, he got his wife to run, and then he basically ran. Oh, yeah. Of course, Hillary's not going to let that happen. It's going to be her show if she gets it, but I'm just saying, because she would have gotten it because she's Bill Clinton's wife.
Well, women
I hate to say that because I know she's an intelligent, ambitious person, but you have to be honest. How did she get to marry him in the first place? You know, it's about power and connections and stuff like that. The families with the money and the power and the prestige.
Yeah, you know? And it's sad that we're still at that point. You know, that we're still, women are still. I mean, a big part of it is women just aren't interested in politics and power in general like men are. A lot of it has to do with the whole alpha male thing and the whole testosterone thing. But I think women.
It's a weird hybrid of it, you know, because to be a politician, you have to be that savvy too, and you can't be the iron-fisted, like, brute. It's they're usually charming. Most of them are, you know, women would find them attractive, you know, like Kennedy, just voting for him in droves. Same with Bill Clinton. Yeah, it's a different kind of, but I know what you're saying, yeah.
Well, this kind of leads into, I mean, maybe we can lead this into that we could look at non-politicians on money, or remembering people who were not in government throughout history, because we do talk a lot about just the politicians, because the politicians are the ones who control, supposedly control so much. But really, do they? And you brought up the Wright brothers because.
Yeah, I actually know someone who. I never really thought about it until he brought this up, but he was like, no, it's not the politician. They kind of set the agenda of, you know, the politics, but, you know, they have to react to what's going on. So that's really what drives politics. It's not the politicians, you know, unless they make an issue out of something that really isn't. But it's usually the entrepreneurs, the businessmen, the inventors, like the Wright brothers, who I actually said would be awesome on the back of the $50 bill, the plane.
Yeah. I forgot that David McCullough was writing this massive book about them, and that's so awesome. He's such a good writer that I'm very excited. Maybe a movie will be made out of this or something, but I read the article that you sent, and I couldn't believe that they were marginalized, that they were seen as, everyone thought they were crazy. That is
Well,
I never knew that.
I really don't have a problem with that, because you would have to be to try and do something like that. I mean, all those great inventors, all those great entrepreneurs, I mean, yeah, they are crazy, but they're just crazy enough to try. I mean, think about it. Late 1800s, right around 1900, you're like, yeah, I'm going to create a flying machine and I'm going to get in it. And yeah, even if you can get it to work, I mean, the article talked about you have to know how to fly it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy.
Wasn't there like a pilot, or not a pilot, but an inventor before who had a flying machine, but they didn't know what to do with it, and that's why they didn't get the credit? I don't remember.
Yeah, was that Samuel Langley? Because
I think.
I wasn't 100% familiar with. I mean, I know I'd heard it before, but I don't know his story, so I don't want to make myself look stupid here.
Well, that's okay.
It talked about how he had all this backing and people were throwing money at him and stuff. Yeah, we admire people like the Wright Brothers. The Wright Brothers are the epitome of what Americans admire. I mean, you just got these two brothers. This is a hobby. It becomes an insane drive that they have. They just pour all their time, money, effort, and energy into it. And yeah, people criticize them and call them crazy. They call them nuts. Doubted them.
Well, yeah, you talked about American exceptionalism earlier. This is a great example of American exceptionalism.
This is it in a nutshell, yeah.
And the industrial age brought a lot of that. They
criticize them. They're dumb. They're stupid. They're weird. They're everything under the sun. And as soon as they get it to work, oh, they're coming home. Ah, they have a big parade. And I love how, Nicola pointed out, every chance they had, they just left and went back to their bicycle shop. They didn't want to be around these people.
I think of Elon Musk today as somebody who's like that. Elon Musk is he's definitely a forward thinker, and I think he's someone that we will be talking about hundreds of years from now, because he is trying to do things that other people call crazy, and
they're the ones that
Tesla
bring us forward, society forward.
I think Tesla, when he started Tesla, he was definitely not taking it seriously by everybody in the industry, for sure. And now finally people are coming around. He also has big ideas for space exploration that gets me excited about the future, considering NASA, is no longer getting all this government funding. And
isn't it sad that NASA is no longer really relevant? I mean,
yeah, they
are, but they're not what they were in the 60s, 70s. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about the 60s and 70s and the space race and all that. Oh, it's beautiful. I mean, poetic, the way this man talks about it. It's just, NASA was that American vision and dream and ambition, and people just poured they were fascinated by it, and it just brought forth all these great new innovations and stuff because we wanted it, But the necessary element was the Soviet Union.
Fear of Soviet
patriotism.
Yeah, space race.
That weird marriage that very bizarre marriage of fear and patriotism.
Yeah.
Like, I want to know how much of the patriotism is driven by that fear.
That's an interesting thing to look at. Maybe I can do that for my thesis that I do in a couple of years. But back to inventors and other notable people in history. Yeah, I think that needs to change. That we don't need just dead presidents on money.
Yeah. And how good is this? I mean, it says they were even ignored by their own local newspapers. Weren't talking about what they were trying to do until they did it. Right there in Dayton, Ohio. And they did it all themselves.
That's my local paper. My local newspaper where I grew up, they covered literally everything. I got married 3 hours away, and they covered it. But that's because my mom and dad.
Yeah.
Still, that's surprising.
Crazy.
I'm glad this book is coming out, and it's going to be a very fun story to read. A true story. The best stories are true.
Exactly. But yeah, it says that people made fun of them. Even the Smithsonian Museum, was reluctant to give them credit. It's basically because, you know, the War Department and the Smithsonian were giving all this money to this other guy to get it done first. And they just swooped right in and did it. You know, bicycle mechanics. It's crazy.
How many people today do you think that are marginalized, that are called crazy or radical? Radical is definitely a pejorative that's thrown around. That someday we're going to look at and like, oh, actually, they were onto something. You know, I think about that all the time. I'm like, yeah, there's that crazy guy that doesn't, like, you know, there's a fine line between what he's saying and just being maybe locked up in a mental institution. And
it's a fine line with a lot of them. You see it with a lot of the people with the mental disorders. What are the people called? The ones that are like they're really good at math and music and stuff, but they can't even function in society. What are they called?
Gifted. I don't know.
I mean, there's some fancy scientific word for them, and you know, they've just got these outlandish gifts, and a lot of them could just read a page as fast as they can look at it and have a photographic memory, and you know, they see numbers as colors and stuff.
I think a lot of our technological progress is from people in our society that are kind of, they are seen to have a disability. For a great example is autism. I mean, a lot of kids that have autism, I believe, are our best hope for the future.
I think that's our modern version of that.
Yeah, because they ways that other people cannot. And you do need to be crazy a little bit.
You got to be obsessed. I mean, Thomas Edison was obsessed. I mean, the guy would take drugs and stay awake for 3 days straight till he figured out, you know, what it was he was trying to figure out.
Yeah. Well, and you think about how the term radical is used. Like anybody who doesn't conform to a society is definitely marginalized. The radical Republicans, these crazy radicals after the Civil War, who not only did they want to end slavery, they wanted African Americans to have complete rights. They are so radical. So
I mean, they use it today with the radical right. I mean, I've never heard the phrase radical left. I've heard extreme.
I hear radical left. I've heard Noam Chomsky be referred to as a radical leftist for sure. There's all kinds of people, left and right. But the bottom line is,
there's definitely radicals on both sides. It's just you never hear it in the media.
What if these radicals though are onto like, we have to give them a voice? Going back to the First Amendment, baby, First Amendment. You've got to let them at least have their say. This kind of this is a good segue for that. What's that story you had about Germany? Yes. I know we're skipping over stuff here. I don't care. The story about xenophobia and Germany, this really was interesting to me.
Yeah, there's a big danger here because I actually did a 45-minute talk on just this one article.
Well, maybe we could save the other stuff for next time if we. I don't mind just going along.
I mean,
but yeah, you go ahead and introduce the story because this is definitely I'm particularly interested because I just got done with a class about the Third Reich, and so I just got done learning about Nazi Germany, about everything you can know about Nazi Germany, and then you send me this story. I'm like, interesting.
Yeah, it is a doozy. It is a doozy. It is a doozy. It is a doozy. It's by the Christian Science Monitor. Seeking refuge. Can Germany afford to let xenophobes chase out the immigrants? I mean, when I first saw this, I thought, oh gosh, you know, false flag here. But I loved the concept because there's so much of this in American history. I mean, we see this with the nativist movement and with the sub-paragraph under the title, arson and assaults targeting immigrants have become nearly a daily occurrence in Germany, even as the country seeks more workers to offset its demographic gray bomb. It's basically the same problem our country has with the baby boomers. So apparently even in Germany after World War II, when it was over, there were just babies everywhere. Although judging by the actions of the Soviet soldiers in Germany after the war, a lot of these might have actually been part Russian children. But
oh yeah,
that'd be another topic for another thing. In fact, that
the Soviets were just as bad as the Nazis
with the Japanese story, out of Korea that we have in our stack of stuff here.
Yeah, we could do that. Well,
but yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, like, the first thing that jumps out at me is Nazi Germany. The goal of the leading Nazis, of course, was to cleanse Germany of people who get rid of people who were not of Aryan descent, trying to have just one, what they called pure race of Germans. And of course, that, even that, like, they had to have a certain look and everything. And that's why everyone from the Roma and Sinti and the Jews and the homosexuals and you name it, if they didn't fit that, then get them out of here. We're going to make room for the Germans. Well, after the war's over, you have 4 countries that occupy. You have denazification. Then you have basically a younger generation that comes up in the 60s that they basically just want to forget everything previous generation and rebel against this generation. Say, this is a new Germany. We are a progressive Germany. And ever since then, basically, you've seen Germany just, it's amazing to see their transformation. I haven't looked at it closely post 1960s, but I know that today Germany, like you said, because of the fact that they're not having babies anymore in Germany, they need the workers to come in, which is the same problem, by the way, the Nazis had, because they were killing a lot of potential workers, and so they had slaves come in basically as workers, foreign labor.
Use the Jewish.
Poles, the Jewish, the Poles, the Ukrainians, all that. But today they're bringing in so many immigrants, and here you go again. You're starting to see bits and pieces of that old Germany, that xenophobe, but particularly. What's disturbing is what I could tell is it's younger people that are just as, and then there's no clear statistics on this from the article, but the fact that there's a faction of neo-Nazis that does still exist in Germany today. We talked about, the swastika, the first episode, and the element of that, how it's banned in Germany, but you still see. I just find that fascinating how, there's this, it's the opposite of how it was during Nazi Germany in many ways, because you have so many different types of people from around the world that now live there. It's a much more diverse place. What do you think?
Yeah, it is. But the thing that I've always found odd about Nazi Germany was, the anti-Semitism, teaching the master German race and stuff, but their allies were the Japanese and the Middle Eastern Arabs strongly supported Hitler. They even, had, before Hitler was completely under siege and stuff, they were actually going in there and meeting and talk, because that was part of their plan was, they had this anti-Semitism in, that's the word I'm looking for. They had it in common, and the Middle East had all that oil and so on and so forth. So that is a very odd friendship. But what I got out of this article, they come out and they say Germany is now the #1 destination in the world for refugees. That's pretty amazing. So it's creating a much more diverse population. 400,000 people could seek refuge there this year. And they had 200,000 last year. So that's 600,000 people just in the last 2 years in a country of about 80 million people.
So if you do that by percentage, imagine that happening in the United States. Imagine how many people would freak out in the United States, because obviously they have a much smaller population. And I know the United States allows a lot of immigrants, but we're talking refugees, not immigrants. We're talking about. I totally see why people are freaking out.
Oh, it is. Germany's not going to look anything like Germany in 20 years. I mean, the demographics on this are jaw-dropping. And of course, you can make arguments that's a good thing. You can make arguments that's a bad thing. But a lot of these are escaping poverty, and they're not war refugees. And the weird thing about it is, we went through our periods in our history where we took in refugees, the refuse of the world, like it mentions on the Statue of Liberty, the poor huddled masses yearning to be free. There were time periods when we cut off immigration. There were time periods where we tried to bring in the best in the world. So it's kind of interesting because depending on where they're from and why they're fleeing and what type of background, I mean, it's going to radically shift and change your country, and it's just, that's why it has to be controlled how many when, because we do a tremendous job of assimilating immigrants, but it's part of it's that American dream, which is that American exceptionalism. They can come here and they can buy into it. We do a very good job of that. I'm not really sure Europe's equipped to do that, especially not on this scale. I mean, you can't take in this many this quick and it not radically change your country. But the thing that got me about this article, I mean, it jumped right out at me when I read it. Said, they're seeing a flare-up of attacks against asylum seekers, their families, and the shelters. And of course, the article is going to come out and say, well, Germany really needs these people. It's a time when they could use them most. And it talks about their labor market. It's going to shrink by 6 million people in 15 years. Then over the next 35 years, 20 million fewer Germans for the workforce. But this happened at the same time we're getting all this new technology and stuff, which I hope will solve a lot of our problems. We just don't have people sitting there on assembly lines and stuff like we used to, robots and computers. And
automation's taking over.
Sometimes I wonder what the heck we're going to be doing in 20 years.
We're going to be hosting podcasts, and we won't have to worry about anything else because the robots will do everything else for us. So, talking about history.
Might be taking over the podcast, but now mentions the respect for local concerns about culture. Like I said, Germany has the German culture. France has the French culture. And it should be viewed as a very sacred thing. I mean, these are countries I really want to go visit desperately. But what is happening is, I said, there's so many people coming in such a short period of time, particularly now. They don't know who they are, where they come from. They don't know if they're war refugees. They don't know if, they can't even handle them all. So you would expect some of that backlash. And of course, they throw in the phrase far right. And a lot of articles like this, it seems like every single person who speaks out against the migrants is immediately dubbed far right. And in a country like Germany, for reasons you mentioned earlier, they're very sensitive about this. You don't want to be called, and it almost seems like anyone who's saying, oh, we might want to talk about what we're doing here, immediately gets dubbed, oh, well, you're Nazi, you're far right, so on and so forth. But here's the kicker. 150 physical attacks or acts of vandalism or property damage against the refugees or their dwellings. This year, 150. But the important thing is how they worded this. 150 attacks or acts of violence or property damage against refugees or their dwellings. So they basically took every single crime committed against these groups of people and clumped them together into one thing and said, it's July and this has happened 150 times. Yeah. This is an act against any of their possessions, against any of their dwellings, against them personally, anything that could be dubbed as an attack. So that makes it sound like, man, this is crazy. I mean, the Germans are just going nuts over there attacking these people. And, that's not really what's happening. They said
when I read the article, I didn't interpret it that way.
Yeah. Number of attacks in 2014 were 162 total. In 2013, there were 58. In 2012, there were only 24. So, they've traced this back over the last, it'd be 3 or 4 years.
But aren't there more refugees now than there
was
more. 3 or 4 years ago?
There's twice as many this year as the year before. So it's kind of like what you would expect. This sentence really jumped out at me. A handful of neo-Nazis attacked a group of asylum seekers at a village near the Baltic Sea. I'm like, what's a handful? 3, 4, 15, 25, 30, 50? Where 250 people could be a handful. I mean, this is that yellow journalism. And when I was reading it, I was just like, this was just jumping off the screen at me. Guns were reportedly fired at the windows of a shelter in Leipzig. Reportedly. Like, this isn't confirmed police report. We don't know that it happened. Reportedly. Someone said that it happened. Now, I have no doubt in my mind it very well could have. But then it said a Red Cross worker was pelted with rocks while she was working in an emergency tent for refugees. Well, I'm like, were they throwing the rocks at her? Were they throwing them at the refugees? Was this a gang? This could have been
unrelated to
a different group. It could have been that. Could have been a group of refugees. The Syrians fight against the Somalians and so on, because they basically cluster themselves off in these camps and stuff. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's very likely it was that handful of neo-Nazis. And they talked about a German official who resigned because of threats by local neo-Nazis. Like I said, I have no doubt in my mind this stuff is happening. I've seen the pictures and the rallies and stuff. But it's kind of like what I mentioned with that Durant, Oklahoma Confederate flag rally. It's a journalist can make out of it what they want to. And I just don't see that this is a problem in Germany, especially when I get to some statistics down here. But they mentioned insufficient funding. No country I don't care what country it is equipped to take in this many people this quickly. And it's just a continuous steady flow. So they did say overfilled shelters are everywhere, and that's making them a target. And I'm like, if there were more shelters, wouldn't that make them more of a target than fewer that have more people in them? But I don't know. I mean, people just don't feel comfortable with this many people who we know nothing about them in their community at all.
Well, here's what I think. I don't think Germany is definitely as xenophobic as the article makes it out to be. I mean, actually, Europe overall is extremely, I would say, more being and open-minded than most Americans.
Oh, there's no doubt that they are.
But like you mentioned this earlier, there is a strong streak of nativism in our country, and I think about if something like this were to happen again. But there are lots of moments in our history where there was a lot of pushback to immigrant groups.
From the very beginning.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we have you could, I think, a whole separate category even for African Americans, because they were talking about the immigrants who willingly came over here, sacrificed everything to have a better life in the United States. The first thing that they get when they come here is like, oh, you're not one of us. Well, sorry, you don't have the same privileges as we do. You have the Know Nothing Party, a political party established for the sole purpose, big purpose of favoring that these immigrants coming in, they should be second-class citizens essentially, or they shouldn't even be here to begin with.
Yeah, I mean it's always there, and it goes back to tribalism. It goes back to the fear of the unknown, or you just don't trust. They're not us. We can't trust them.
Yeah.
But you're getting this both ways in Europe, everywhere, with the large section, because it's kind of like the white flight in the United States. When these groups move into the cities, they flee out. You get this cordoned off thing. You hear all the stories of the no-go zones and the grooming gangs and all this stuff that's going on in Europe. So I mean, there is a lot of need for concern, and that's not even getting into not knowing who they are. They might be terrorists and stuff like that. These are all valid claims.
The same thing's going on right now, and you're having a flood of Somali refugees going to Kenya. There was a story on This American Life about it. And then, of course, the people in Somalia who are refugees, there's a lottery for these people to become American citizens. And every year they choose randomly people in this lottery for them to get a chance to become American citizen. But in Kenya, there's just so many refugees that the people in Kenya, they hate Somalis. Like, they are not only afraid of. Go ahead.
That's the other thing I see all the time is everyone, because I read about 5 or 6 of these articles a day. I mean, the comments underneath them, it seems like nobody wants these refugees in Europe. I mean, I'm hard pressed to find a comment sympathetic to them, and that's from America, Canada, Australia, Europe, where most of the internet commenters are coming from. But it says, why doesn't the African and Middle Eastern countries take these people in? And they are. I mean, as you said, Kenya's overflooded, Jordan's overflooded, Lebanon has more than they could possibly handle for a tiny country like that. I mean, this is the biggest migration of people since the end of World War II. So it's going to cause problems.
So what do we do then? What is the solution to this? This is a tough one.
Birth control? I don't know. I don't know. Because, I mean, you just got a lot of poor people. And the wars and stuff, I mean, that's kind of there's not enough resources in that part of the world as far as arable land and opportunity. And it's just the unstable part of the world. A lot of it's directly linked to the West foreign policy in that region.
Well, you mentioned
too many people to feed, and there's not enough jobs.
Well, you also mentioned birth control. Well, yeah, the opposite happening in Europe and especially Russia, and then the one-child policy in China is going to have consequences as well. Oh yeah,
there's 30 million Chinese men that can't get married because there's no females.
So bring in those female refugees who are single. No. But yeah,
because apparently it's all men flooding into Europe. I mean, you see the pictures. It's like overwhelmingly men, and this is going to be a big problem.
So, the women don't want to. They don't want those jobs. They're not going to come for those jobs. That's why
it's not safe to make the trip either. But I mean, you're bringing in 600,000 men to Europe. I mean, imagine the demographics there. From a drastically different culture. I mean, this is a trend, and I don't know if you've seen the crime statistics and the rape statistics and stuff, but they're frightening of what's going on over there. But so this article goes on to say, this is fostering a climate that makes the radical extreme neo-Nazi right seem more legitimate because more people speaking out against it. It makes the radical right neo-Nazi think, see, we've got the support and stuff, and that kind of makes this problem worse. But the next thing that really jumped out at me in this article, I mean, you remember when it said, 44% of Germans harbored animosity toward the refugees. That was a number they threw out. So that's almost half. But then later in the article, they say over 50% of Germans want more refugees.
Yeah, so I didn't know what to think about that.
People who were framing the art, either if you're not for them, you're against them. That's like saying unless you speak out against racism, you're racist.
Yeah, that's probably not the best article to gauge German opinion.
I mean, it's like they put them in: you're for them or you're against them. Those two categories on the extreme.
You're a Democrat or you're a Republican.
Here's the dead giveaway of this article. You remember when I said there were, what was it, 625 attacks or something like that? Do you remember what the number was?
I'm
wanting to say it was...
It's not opening up still for me.
Still not opening up. But anyway, they threw this number out there. Nearly 150. Nearly 150 this year. So this was like in early July.
Yeah.
So they said the number was 150 of all these crimes clumped together. Remember how they clumped them all together? You bump into them and get mad and shove them out of the way. The fact he's a refugee has nothing to do with it because they counted it as an attack on an immigrant. Here's the dead giveaway of this article. In 2014, according to data from the Federal Crime Police Office, there were more than 125,000 cases of dangerous and serious bodily harm and 600,000 incidents of property damage against Germans. So if you add those two numbers together, last year, 725,000 Germans fell victims to the same kind of attack. Compared to the 150 that's happened against the refugees this year. So if you take the similar kind of attacks, this is a non-event. And they wrote a whole entire article about it. Oh, the Germans are xenophobes, they're Nazis, they're attacking the refugees 150 times this year. Yeah, last year, the exact same category of crimes, Germans fell victim to them 725,000 times. And it's just the last 2 years, we're talking 600,000 refugees showing up in Germany compared to 80 million people. I mean, run the numbers on it. Apparently, the refugees are treated like the golden children in Germany. Crime is somewhat of a unheard of thing for them to fall a victim of. But here's the weird part of this article. Now, they talk about Germans striking out against immigrants and stuff like that. Talked about this guy, Thierry Danchop from Cameroon. Now, I feel very sorry for this guy, Thierry Danchop from Cameroon. He's been in Germany for over a year. And Danchop is what you would call an economic migrant. He went to Germany because he wanted to work. And in the article, it talked about him lamenting his inability to seek gainful employment because his status was still in limbo. This is the thing that infuriates me about government on all levels in every country is the bureaucracy, the red tape. It's so hard to start a business. It's so hard to immigrate into a country legally, thus creating this problem. We have it big time here. He's wanting to work. He's there. He's not wanting to leech off the system or anything like that. This guy wants to work. And he cannot because the German government will not let him work because he's in limbo. And, of course, they're backed up with dealing with this problem and all of this paperwork and refugees and filtering them through. But this guy's there. He wants to work. He's a potential source of labor. In this article, he talks and says, a lot of us are here and we want to work and they will not let us. Like, how at the same time can they be the future, the answer to all your future problems and you won't even allow them to work? I mean, I've seen where some countries like Austria and Sweden, and they won't even let these people work if they want to. They'll just put them up in a apartment or something and they'll send them enough money to stay alive and they won't let them work.
Why not? Why won't they let them work?
Exactly. It's crazy. And it's not like they're trying to assimilate them or anything. They're putting them off in these neighborhoods just with their refugees. They're not letting them work. They're not assimilating them in. More people are just coming in. This guy wants to work. Now, he did say these refugees have some potential skills that are in demand for German companies. And I'm like, what is someone who's from a third world country, most likely uneducated? What are their skills? That's why I don't know what these people are going to do in Europe.
It's like they're just holding them, basically. That's all they... That's a weird thing. That's the same issue that they had all this labor come in. They had all these people, and they didn't they didn't use them like they should have, where they would actually be productive members of society. Just punished them and treated them so badly they couldn't even work. But that's kind of a different issue. Why would you not let someone work? Someone who can help your economy grow,
yeah, I mean, especially a guy like this who really wants. But I mean, when I think of modern Germany, I've never been there, but what do I think of? Engineering, computers, high advanced technology, the automobiles. I'm like, really, what skills do these people have? I mean, they don't speak the language.
Well, they need the labor. That's the bottom line. We just talked about that. And they are the European Union's main source of productivity right now. And countries like Greece, obviously, were, someone would argue, leeching off of them.
Yeah. Now, there's no way Greece can handle all the immigrants, because most of them are landing in Italy or Greece. And by the EU policy, they're supposed to stay there. But I mean, those countries, there's no way. They've got massive unemployment already.
Yeah.
And they don't have any money. But of course, none of these Western governments have any money because, they've spent themselves into oblivion. But that was crazy to me. And then it says, it is therefore especially important for Germany to make itself as attractive and as cosmopolitan as possible. Now, the word cosmopolitan is a little scary when it comes to this, because cosmopolitan means worldly, multiracial, big city, stuff like that. I'm like, okay, I'm sure a lot of German cities are. But the very next paragraph says, we don't think the rise of the refugee numbers has not always been well communicated to the smaller, tight-knit communities that are ultimately the ones responsible for hosting these new arrivals. So they send them to these towns all over Germany. A lot of them are really, really small towns. And they put them up in extra apartments and places like that. And these little towns freak out because, they're sending in all of these refugees. And I read an article a couple of weeks ago, and it literally was an article about a school that had to shut down part of the school in this place in southeastern Germany because they sent a bunch of Syrian refugees there, and the kids couldn't go out and play in the gymnasium and on the playground anymore because there were hundreds of these Syrian men there. And the school sent a letter home telling them to dress their daughters modestly so that we don't offend the Syrians, because they're from a Muslim background. And a lot of people were complaining, well, why does the Germans have to accommodate the Syrians and pay for the Syrians and all this stuff? And, a lot of it is just not safe for them to be out there because you don't really know. I mean, they came from a country in the middle of a violent war, from a radically different background. And, I mean, Europe's got a mess on their hands. There's no doubt about it.
Well, the bottom line is that you going through all this, I just think there's a lot of change, and the demographics are never going to be the same, and a lot of people are scared. Again, this seems to be the theme of this episode. Yeah. But I think if we just allow a little bit more freedoms as far as on everybody's end, I think we're going to all be better off. And I think other countries, they need to be more accepting of refugees. Because it sounds like Germany's been very accepting.
They are. I mean, that's what made me furious about this article.
Yeah. And
I mean, it's literally trying to say these guys are Nazis when they're the most caring, accepting country.
Yeah. Germany today is one of the most progressive. Oh, I'm sorry.
I've dominated this conversation, and I need to let you talk. But it just made me. Like I said, I talked about this for 45 minutes because I just went off on it. And it's the Christian Science Monitor, but I mean, 25 neo-Nazis go around marching, and they may have shot a gun, and they may, they try to set this building on fire, but it's not a rampant problem. And I said, I guarantee you the Germans have fallen victim to crimes committed by these refugees way more often than the reverse has been. Like I said, the rape statistics are frightening, and it just made me furious. But yeah, here's the scary part, though. They're ultimately responsible for it. So there's a lot of these little towns that don't want it. They're not comfortable with it. And the government in Berlin and the European Union is just basically forcing it on them. I mean, I've read a lot of articles where the people who are opposing the immigrants are marching down the streets arm in arm, you know, saying we're scared for our daughters, because these are almost entirely men. They're from a very impoverished third world, you know, different culture where there's almost no women's rights in a lot of these countries and places. I mean, you're coming from a place where ISIS is taking control, and there's, you know, they're kidnapping women, you know, the Yazidis and the Christians and the Shias versus the Sunnis, and it's really violent. And like I said, I don't know. And the birth rates, if the Germans are having 2 children per couple or less, these immigrant families are having 6, 7, 8. 40 years, it's not the Germany it was. I mean, by any stretch of the imagination. And if you don't assimilate the people to Germany, it's not Germany in 50 years, it's Syria.
Well, I like to think that, you know,
so they have to be assimilated.
The principles are still the same, but I don't know. Interesting thing to look at. I just I don't know a whole lot about, you know, all of it. I'm just going by what the article you sent me, but
yeah, all the articles just.
I love how, I mean, this is a great way to end. I think we probably better end it here soon.
Yeah, we'll have to.
But you're adding context to this story where there is no context in that article, and that's a great thing to. I mean, you have to really consider the fact that Germany it's come so far. It's one of the most progressive countries in the world, and
I mean, it's
almost like
made a amazing transformation after World War II.
Yes.
So you'd like to think people fleeing from ISIS and places like that could be assimilated and make a transformation too.
Yeah.
But of course, you know, the big issue here is Christian Europe, Islamic, Middle East, radically different cultures and backgrounds, and you have to mold them together into a functioning society.
Well, it's increasingly a more secular Europe. Europe is
very much so, and
more secular than the
United States. Christian values, and you have to somehow get this to work. And the history of the two is not good at all. Yeah. But I'll just real quickly see what else I have in here. Yeah, the article goes on to talk about how some town, you know, they're mobilizing volunteers to help them and teach them German. And here they throw in half the German people want more refugees. And apparently if you don't, you harbor anti-refugee sentiment. I mean, that's crazy. And, you know, the towns feel forgotten, you know, the ones that are having to take all the refugees. But it goes on here to say, the refugee asylum seekers are given 325 euros a month. That's $350. Who in the world in Europe, in Germany, can live off $350 a month? I mean, I realize they're not paying rent, but geez. You know, I talked about has to cover his lawyer fees. That's the other thing I went off on big time was the lawyers in this story. A transportation pass, daily language classes. He doesn't have to pay for those, but he has to take the bus to get there. His cell phone bill and food. You know, these refugees have cell phones. They have iPhones. And, of course, food. And I feel so bad for this guy because he wants to work, and they won't let him. But, yeah, you do the math on 600,000 refugees times $350. That's an astronomical number. So this guy exhausts his budget every month and he can't work. And the lawyer thing, the lawyers are the ones really tangling all this up because they're getting paid. The weird thing is the refugees get that money they have to get lawyers. Lawyers go out and represent groups of these people, and they take a little bit of money from everyone. Yeah, because what lawyer are you going to get for $325 a month? It didn't happen. So they're representing large numbers of people, but then they tie up the process. And the economic refugees who should be sent home, they slow down the process so they can stay there, so they can keep getting money from them. I mean, it's the lawyers making the killing off this, complicating everything. The guy wants to work, let him work. I mean,
yeah,
it's just everything about that article infuriated me. To no end.
You made a video? You made a video about that?
No, I went off on a rant about it.
On where's the rant? I want to see the rant.
The rant?
Where's it at?
Well, I didn't make a video.
Oh, you mean just part?
I didn't publish it. I didn't publish.
Oh, okay. Because that pretty much was your rant, I think, right? That was.
Well, like I said, I apologize for that, but I warned you in advance. But that's journalists do this all the time.
Yeah,
and 1,000 people, 995 of them will not see it. They would read that article and think the Germans are a bunch of Nazis.
It fits the theme of this show because you are adding context to an article.
Yeah.
I just hope that article is obscure and that it isn't shaping opinions. But if somebody comes across, I'm gonna put a link to that article in the show notes so that we can maybe if somebody stumbles across it, they can.
I think they tried to be. I mean, they did point out the stuff that I brought out, but what I'm saying is most people wouldn't have picked up on it at all.
Yeah. Well, it's scary how much how easy it is for misinformation or disinformation to spread.
I mean, it was all valid. It's just the way they worded it and framed it.
Well, I would classify any kind of spin or propaganda. I would say disinformation because they're trying to mislead the reader. I mean,
yeah. I mean, it was awful. I mean, they did offer, but I don't know. They might not have been trying to do that, but that's the way I read it. I was just like, especially the number things when they took every crime and clumped them together and it's like, oh, this guy, had his ear pod stolen, so they classify it as an attack on refugees.
Yeah. You must have watched a guide to critical thinking video because you did a really good job critically thinking about that article.
I mean, that's the process I always go through is seeking out bias and everything. Like I said, it did offer all the facts I used to destroy it himself, so it may not have been what it was trying to do, but it was just...
At least it offered the facts. At least it didn't omit, vital statistics.
Most people wouldn't have picked up on the numbers thing. I mean, that you did have to read between the lines and do the math yourself and go, wait a minute.
Oh yeah, because when I read it, I didn't really pick up on some of that. But I still again just keep thinking about how far Germany has come in such a short amount of time. And when I hear neo-Nazi in Germany, I was like, what? Like that's my first thought. Like. There's the
Remember, it was a handful. It could have been 5 people. Yeah. Literally. Yeah. It could have been 500.
There's a Ku Klux Klan in the United States still.
There's 5,000 of those guys who've done nothing in 30 years.
Maybe one of them will watch this video and like, hey, I got a shout out. Well, I think we'll wrap it up here. We're at this is the longest one we've done. It's over.
We didn't even get halfway through.
Next time we'll get to
all my fault.
No, it's okay. No, I was kind of guilty of that with the Iranian nuclear deal. But we have more stories we'll get to next time. There's a story about revisionist history and about what Japanese soldiers did during World War II. And then was there another one that we had?
Yeah, I've got my ceiling fans blown them all over the. There's my knee.
He still prints papers out. I should have printed them out because of the internet.
I like to, like I said, highlight the Supreme Court one has to be talked about.
Oh, term limits. We could do a whole. Yeah, we could do a whole podcast episode about term limits.
And very cool story out of Israel. about farming. It was around way earlier than we thought.
Yes, that's the one I found.
Movie Tone YouTube, where they're putting up all the
old
videos.
Newsreels. Yeah.
Yes.
So we'll get to that next time. We'll talk here sooner than later.
I mean, if you want to do it, maybe Sunday night.
Oh, we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
We're still broadcasting here.
Yeah,
Robert. We can't let them know that. That's secret. But we both have to start teaching next week. So actually, I teach a little bit later than you, but so yeah, I might. We're still going to make time. We're going to commit to doing this. And again, if you want to contact us, it's contextpodcast@gmail.com. Contextpodcast@gmail.com, and you can give us your feedback. Don't forget to review the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. Robert, you haven't done that, buddy. You haven't reviewed the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. Why not?
It won't let me on one. I did on the first episode on one, but one of them it will not let me log in at all. The other one, I have listened to them both, but I think it's on Stitcher.
Well, get on the iTunes one is what counts. That's the one where most people go to. But yeah, so thanks for listening to this. I think I'm going to stop the broadcast here so we can.
Okay.
Goodbye.